Sarah Chin never imagined that her childhood dream of serving in the Navy would lead her to the most humiliating moment of her life, followed by the most extraordinary twist of fate anyone could imagine. Growing up in a small fishing town in Maine, Sarah was the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants who had fled their homeland in the 1970s with nothing but hope and determination. Her father, Min Chun, worked 16-hour days at the local shipyard, his hands permanently stained with engine oil and his back bent from years of manual labor. Her mother, Lon, cleaned houses for wealthy families during the day and took in sewing work at night, her fingers moving with mechanical precision over fabric while Sarah did her homework at the kitchen table. The Chin family lived in a cramped apartment above the town's only Vietnamese restaurant, where the smell of pho and fresh herbs mixed with the salty air from the nearby harbor. Despite their financial struggles, Sarah's parents had an unwavering belief in the power of education and hard work. They spoke to their daughter in both Vietnamese and English, ensuring she understood her heritage while also preparing her for success in America. Every night, after her parents finished their exhausting work days, they would sit with Sarah and help her with homework, even though they struggled with English themselves. Sarah excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science. Her teachers noticed her exceptional analytical mind and her ability to solve complex problems that stumped her classmates. But it wasn't just her academic abilities that set her apart. Sarah possessed a natural leadership quality that emerged during group projects and school activities. She could organize her classmates, delegate tasks effectively, and motivate others to achieve goals they thought were impossible. During high school, Sarah became fascinated with naval history after reading about Admiral Grace Hopper, the pioneering computer scientist who served in the Navy and helped develop early programming languages. She spent countless hours at the town library, devouring books about naval strategy, maritime engineering, and the stories of remarkable naval officers who had changed the course of history. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of naval ships, maps of famous battles, and quotes from legendary admirals. When Sarah announced to her parents that she wanted to attend the Naval Academy, they were both proud and terrified. They understood that their daughter possessed extraordinary potential, but they also knew the challenges she would face as a woman of Vietnamese descent in a traditionally male-dominated and predominantly white institution. However, they had not escaped war-torn Vietnam and built a new life in America only to limit their daughter's dreams. The application process for the Naval Academy was grueling. Sarah had to maintain perfect grades while participating in multiple extracurricular activities, completing a rigorous physical fitness program, and securing recommendations from teachers, community leaders, and local politicians. She wrote and rewrote her personal essay dozens of times, trying to capture her motivation for serving her country while honoring her parents' sacrifice. When the acceptance letter arrived, Sarah's mother cried for hours. Min Chun took the day off from work for the first time in years, and the family celebrated at their favorite restaurant. The entire Vietnamese community in their small town rallied around Sarah, organizing fundraisers to help her purchase the required uniforms and supplies for the academy. The Naval Academy proved to be more challenging than Sarah had ever imagined. The academic workload was intense, with classes in engineering, navigation, military history, and leadership. The physical training was brutal, designed to push midshipmen beyond their perceived limits. But perhaps most difficult of all was the social environment. Sarah found herself one of only a handful of Asian American women in her class, constantly aware that she stood out in ways that made some of her classmates uncomfortable. During her first year, Sarah faced subtle but persistent discrimination. Some classmates made comments about her appearance or questioned whether she truly belonged at the academy. A few suggested that she had only been admitted because of affirmative action policies, despite her exceptional academic record. These experiences were painful, but they also strengthened Sarah's resolve to prove herself through performance rather than words. Sarah threw herself into her studies with remarkable intensity. She consistently ranked in the top 5% of her class across all subjects. Her tactical and strategic thinking impressed her professors, who noted in their evaluations that she possessed an unusual ability to see patterns and connections that others missed. She excelled in war games and simulation exercises, often developing innovative solutions to complex military scenarios. Despite her academic success, Sarah struggled to fit in socially. Many of her classmates came from military families with generations of service, while others had attended elite preparatory schools. They shared cultural references and experiences that were foreign to Sarah. She often felt like an outsider looking in, observing social dynamics she didn't fully understand. Everything changed during her third year when Sarah was assigned to work on a special project analyzing historical naval battles using computer modeling techniques. This project combined her love of history with her exceptional mathematical abilities. She spent months developing algorithms that could analyze factors like weather conditions, ship positioning, supply lines, and crew morale to understand why certain battles had specific outcomes. Her work caught the attention of Captain Robert Harrison, one of the Academy's most respected instructors and a veteran of multiple combat deployments. Captain Harrison recognized that Sarah's analytical approach represented a new way of thinking about naval strategy that could have significant implications for modern warfare. He became her mentor, providing guidance not just on academic matters, but also helping her navigate the social challenges of Academy life. Under Captain Harrison's mentorship, Sarah began to develop confidence in her unique perspective and abilities. She learned to articulate her ideas more effectively and to present her analysis in ways that resonated with both superiors and peers. She also began to understand that her different background and experiences weren't weaknesses to overcome, but strengths that could contribute to more effective military leadership. During her final year at the Academy, Sarah was selected for several prestigious assignments. She served as a squad leader, responsible for the training and development of younger midshipmen. Her leadership style was collaborative and analytical, focusing on understanding each person's strengths and helping them develop their potential. Her squad consistently performed well in evaluations, and several of the midshipmen she mentored credited her with helping them overcome academic or personal challenges. Sarah also participated in advanced war gaming exercises where senior naval officers observed midshipmen handling complex strategic scenarios. In one memorable exercise, Sarah was tasked with developing a response to a hypothetical crisis involving multiple enemy forces and limited resources. Her solution involved a carefully orchestrated series of moves that neutralized threats while minimizing casualties and preserving strategic assets. The observing officers were so impressed that they requested copies of her analysis for use in future training programs. As graduation approached, Sarah faced decisions about her career path within the Navy. Her exceptional academic record and demonstrated leadership abilities meant she could request assignment to virtually any specialty area. She was particularly interested in naval intelligence and strategic planning, fields where her analytical skills could have maximum impact. The graduation ceremony was a moment of tremendous pride for Sarah and her family. Her parents traveled from Maine to attend, wearing their finest clothes and beaming with pride as their daughter received her commission as an ensign. Captain Harrison spoke at the ceremony, noting that Sarah's class represented the future of naval leadership and emphasizing the importance of diverse perspectives and innovative thinking in addressing the challenges facing the Navy. After graduation, Sarah was assigned to her first duty station aboard the USS Montgomery, a coastal combat ship based in San Diego. This assignment was considered highly desirable for a new officer, as it provided opportunities to gain experience in multiple areas of naval operations while serving under experienced commanders who could provide mentorship and guidance. The transition from academy life to active duty presented new challenges for Sarah. As one of the most junior officers aboard the ship, she was responsible for managing various administrative and operational tasks while continuing to learn the practical aspects of naval service. She worked closely with enlisted sailors, many of whom had years of experience and were initially skeptical of a young officer's abilities. Sarah approached these challenges with the same determination and analytical thinking that had served her well at the academy. She spent extra time learning about ship systems and operations, asking questions of experienced crew members, and studying technical manuals during her off-duty hours. She also made an effort to understand the backgrounds and motivations of the sailors under her command, recognizing that effective leadership required building trust and mutual respect. Within months, Sarah had earned the respect of both her superiors and the enlisted personnel she worked with. Her ability to solve complex logistical problems and her willingness to take on additional responsibilities made her a valuable member of the ship's team. She was particularly skilled at coordinating between different departments and ensuring that operations ran smoothly even under challenging conditions. However, Sarah's rapid success also attracted attention from some quarters where it was not entirely welcome. A few senior officers aboard the ship came from old Navy families with traditional views about women in combat roles and minorities in leadership positions. While they could not openly criticize Sarah's performance, they found subtle ways to undermine her confidence and limit her opportunities for advancement. Despite these challenges, Sarah continued to excel in her duties. She received excellent evaluations from her immediate superiors and was selected for several special assignments that typically went to more senior officers. Her analytical skills proved particularly valuable during training exercises and real-world operations where quick thinking and strategic planning were essential. As her first tour of duty neared its end, Sarah received news that would change the trajectory of her career. She had been selected for promotion to lieutenant and will be transferred to a new assignment at Naval Station Norfolk, one of the largest naval installations in the world. This assignment would provide opportunities to work with advanced naval technologies and to participate in high-level strategic planning activities. The promotion ceremony was held aboard the USS Montgomery with Sarah's shipmates and superiors in attendance. As she pinned on her new lieutenant's bars, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small fishing town in Maine to this moment. She thought about her parents' sacrifices, Captain Harrison's mentorship, and the countless hours of study and preparation that had made this achievement possible. But Sarah had no way of knowing that her greatest challenges and most extraordinary opportunities still lay ahead. The assignment to Norfolk would test her abilities in ways she could never have imagined and would ultimately lead to the moment of humiliation and triumph that would define her naval career and change her life forever. Lieutenant Sarah Chun arrived at Naval Station Norfolk on a gray October morning, her car loaded with personal belongings and her mind filled with anticipation about her new assignment. Norfolk was unlike anything she had experienced before. The base sprawled across thousands of acres, home to massive aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and support vessels that represented the full might of the United States Navy. Sarah's new position was in the Strategic Planning Division, where she would be working on classified projects involving future naval operations and technology development. The work combined her strengths in analysis and strategic thinking with access to cutting-edge naval intelligence and advanced computer modeling systems. For someone who had dreamed of contributing to naval strategy at the highest levels, this assignment represented an incredible opportunity. Her immediate supervisor was Commander James Mitchell, a career officer with 25 years of experience and a reputation for demanding excellence from his staff. Mitchell had specifically requested Sarah for his team after reviewing her academy records and her performance during her first assignment. He was impressed by her analytical capabilities and believed she could contribute to some of the division's most challenging projects. The Strategic Planning Division occupied a secure building within the Norfolk complex, where officers and civilian analysts worked on projects that could influence Navy policy for years to come. Sarah's clearance level allowed her access to information about potential threats, emerging technologies, and strategic plans that were known only to a select group of military leaders. During her first weeks at Norfolk, Sarah immersed herself in learning about the division's ongoing projects. She was assigned to a team analyzing the implications of new missile technologies being developed by potential adversaries and developing countermeasures that could protect American naval forces. The work required understanding complex technical specifications, analyzing intelligence reports, and modeling various combat scenarios. Sarah's colleagues in the Strategic Planning Division were among the most intelligent and accomplished officers in the Navy. Many held advanced degrees from prestigious universities and had extensive experience in combat operations or specialized technical fields. The intellectual environment was stimulating but also intensely competitive, with officers constantly striving to distinguish themselves and advance their careers. Initially, Sarah felt somewhat intimidated by her new colleagues. Unlike her previous assignment, where she had quickly gained respect through her work performance, here she was starting over with a group of officers who were already skeptical of anyone who hadn't proven themselves in this specific environment. Some questioned whether someone so young and relatively inexperienced belonged in such a sensitive position. The division chief was Captain William Bradford, a decorated officer who had commanded ships in multiple combat deployments and was known throughout the Navy for his strategic brilliance. Bradford maintained strict standards for his staff and had little patience for officers who couldn't meet his expectations. He evaluated people based purely on their ability to contribute to the mission, regardless of their background or personal characteristics. Sarah's first major project involved analyzing enemy submarine capabilities and developing recommendations for improving American anti-submarine warfare tactics. She spent weeks studying intelligence reports, technical specifications, and historical battle data. Her mathematical background proved invaluable as she developed computer models that could predict submarine behavior under various conditions. Working 18-hour days, Sarah produced an analysis that identified several vulnerabilities in existing anti-submarine tactics and proposed innovative solutions based on new sensor technologies and coordinated fleet movements. When she presented her findings to Commander Mitchell, he was impressed by the thoroughness of her research and the creativity of her recommendations. However, when the analysis was presented to the broader team, Sarah encountered unexpected resistance. Lieutenant Commander David Walsh, a submarine warfare specialist with 15 years of experience, challenged several of her assumptions and questioned whether someone without submarine service could truly understand the complexities involved. His criticism was technically sophisticated, but also seemed designed to undermine Sarah's credibility with other team members. Walsh came from a Navy family that traced its service back to World War II. His father had been a submarine commander, and his brother currently served as an executive officer on a nuclear submarine. He viewed himself as part of an elite community within the Navy and was skeptical of outsiders who claimed to understand submarine warfare based on theoretical analysis rather than practical experience. The conflict with Walsh created tension within the team and put Sarah in a difficult position. She could defend her analysis based on the data and modeling, but she couldn't claim the hands-on experience that Walsh possessed. Other team members watched the dynamic carefully, some supporting Sarah's innovative approach, while others aligned with Walsh's emphasis on practical experience. Commander Mitchell found himself mediating between different perspectives while trying to maintain team cohesion. He recognized that both Sarah and Walsh brought valuable skills to the team, but their conflicting approaches were creating problems that could affect the quality of their work. He decided to assign them to work together on a follow-up project, hoping that collaboration would lead to mutual respect. The joint project involved developing training scenarios for anti-submarine warfare that incorporated both Sarah's theoretical insights and Walsh's practical experience. Working together proved challenging, as they had fundamentally different approaches to problem-solving and communication. Sarah preferred to analyze all available data before reaching conclusions, while Walsh relied heavily on intuition developed through years of operational experience. Despite their differences, the collaboration produced excellent results. Sarah's analytical rigor helped identify flaws in existing training programs, while Walsh's experience provided realistic context for implementing improvements. Their joint recommendations were adopted by Navy training commands and led to measurable improvements in anti-submarine warfare effectiveness. However, the success of their collaboration did not resolve the underlying tension between Sarah and Walsh. If anything, Walsh seemed to resent the fact that someone so junior had contributed equally to a project in his area of expertise. He began making subtle comments about Sarah's background and qualifications that were designed to undermine her standing with other officers. Meanwhile, Sarah was developing a reputation within the Strategic Planning Division as an exceptionally capable analyst. Her work on various projects consistently exceeded expectations, and she began receiving assignments typically reserved for more senior officers. Captain Bradford took notice of her performance and began including her in high-level briefings where she could observe strategic decision-making at the highest levels. During one particularly sensitive briefing about potential threats in the Pacific region, Sarah identified a pattern in enemy naval movements that other analysts had missed. Her observation led to a significant intelligence breakthrough that provided early warning about a potential crisis. Bradford was so impressed that he personally commended Sarah's work in her performance evaluation and recommended her for advancement opportunities. The recognition from Bradford elevated Sarah's status within the division, but also intensified the resentment from some of her colleagues. Walsh and a few other officers began spreading rumors that Sarah's rapid advancement was due to favorable treatment rather than merit. They suggested that the Navy was promoting diversity over competence, and that Sarah's success came at the expense of more qualified officers. These rumors created a toxic atmosphere within parts of the division. Sarah found herself excluded from informal gatherings and noticed that some colleagues were less willing to share information or collaborate on projects. The isolation was particularly difficult because Sarah had always relied on teamwork and collaboration to achieve her best results. Despite the social challenges, Sarah continued to produce exceptional work. She developed new analytical techniques that improved the accuracy of strategic assessments and created computer models that helped predict enemy behavior in various scenarios. Her innovations were adopted by other divisions within the Navy and contributed to improved decision-making at the highest levels of military leadership. As Sarah's first year at Norfolk drew to a close, she was selected for a special assignment that would test her abilities in an entirely new way. The Navy was planning a major fleet exercise that would simulate combat operations under realistic conditions. Sarah was chosen to serve as part of the planning team responsible for developing scenarios and evaluating the performance of participating units. The fleet exercise, designated Operation Neptune's Trident, would involve dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of personnel operating across vast areas of the Atlantic Ocean. The exercise was designed to test new tactical concepts and evaluate the readiness of fleet units for potential combat operations. It would be observed by senior Navy leadership, including admirals and civilian officials from the Pentagon. Sarah's role in exercise planning was to develop analytical tools for evaluating the performance of participating units and identifying lessons learned that could improve future operations. This required understanding the capabilities and limitations of various ship classes, aircraft types, and weapon systems. She would also be responsible for briefing senior leaders on the exercise results and recommendations for improvement. The assignment was both an incredible opportunity and a significant risk for Sarah's career. Success would establish her as one of the Navy's rising analytical talents and could lead to assignments with even greater responsibility. Failure, however, would likely end her prospects for advancement and could damage her reputation throughout the Navy. As planning for Operation Neptune's Trident intensified, Sarah worked closely with senior officers for various fleet units to understand their capabilities and requirements. She traveled to different naval bases to observe training operations and interview experienced commanders about their tactical preferences and lessons learned from previous exercises. During these visits, Sarah encountered the full spectrum of attitudes toward women in naval leadership roles. Some commanders were completely supportive and valued her analytical insights. Others were politely skeptical, willing to work with her, but clearly doubtful about her capabilities. A few were openly hostile, making comments that suggested they viewed her presence as evidence of declining standards in the Navy. The most difficult encounter occurred during a visit to a destroyer squadron where the Commodore made several inappropriate comments about women serving on combat ships. When Sarah attempted to discuss analytical requirements for the exercise, he dismissed her concerns and suggested that she focus on administrative tasks rather than tactical analysis. The meeting was professionally humiliating, but Sarah maintained her composure and completed her assigned tasks. These experiences reinforced Sarah's determination to prove herself through exceptional performance. She worked even harder to ensure that her analysis would be thorough, accurate, and valuable to the exercise participants. She developed sophisticated computer models that could track multiple variables simultaneously and provide real-time feedback to exercise controllers. As the date for Operation Neptune's Trident approached, anticipation built throughout the Navy. The exercise would be the largest fleet operation in several years and would test concepts that could influence naval strategy for the next decade. For Sarah, it represented the culmination of her analytical work and her chance to demonstrate her value to Navy leadership at the highest levels. However, none of the participants in the exercise could have anticipated the events that would unfold during the operation. What was planned as a routine training exercise would become the setting for a series of incidents that would test Sarah's professional abilities and personal resilience in ways that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the deep-seated prejudices and institutional challenges that still existed within the Navy, despite official policies promoting equality and inclusion. Sarah's moment of triumph was about to become her moment of greatest humiliation, setting up the extraordinary sequence of events that would follow. Operation Neptune's Trident began on a crisp November morning with the largest assembly of naval vessels seen in the Atlantic for several years. From her position aboard the command ship USS Blue Ridge, Lieutenant Sarah Chun watched as dozens of warships maneuvered into formation, their gray hulls cutting through the dark water as helicopters and fighter jets crisscrossed the sky above. The sight was magnificent and sobering, representing the incredible power and precision of the United States Navy. Sarah's responsibilities during the exercise were demanding and multifaceted. She needed to monitor the performance of participating units using her specially developed analytical tools, coordinate with exercise controllers to ensure realistic scenarios, and prepare regular briefings for senior leadership observing the operation. Her computer station was equipped with multiple monitors displaying real-time data from ships, aircraft, and shore-based facilities. The first few days of the exercise proceeded smoothly. Sarah's analytical systems tracked the movement and performance of hundreds of individual units, identifying patterns and trends that provided valuable insights into tactical effectiveness. Her briefings to the senior leadership were well received, with several admirals complimenting her clear presentation style and insightful analysis. Among the observers aboard the USS Blue Ridge was Rear Admiral Thomas Hawthorne, a highly regarded officer who commanded one of the Navy's most important fleet units. Hawthorne had a reputation as a demanding leader who expected excellence from his subordinates, but also as someone who recognized and rewarded exceptional performance. His presence at the exercise indicated the high level of importance the Navy placed on the operation. Also present was Captain Marcus Steele, a surface warfare officer who commanded a destroyer squadron participating in the exercise. Steele came from a prominent military family and had been fast-tracked for promotion throughout his career. However, his rapid advancement had come with minimal exposure to the analytical and technological aspects of modern naval warfare that were becoming increasingly important. The tension between traditional naval leadership culture and the growing importance of analytical capabilities created an undercurrent of conflict throughout the exercise. Some senior officers embraced the technological innovations and analytical insights that officers like Sarah represented. Others viewed these developments with suspicion, believing they undermined the importance of traditional naval skills and experience. On the fourth day of the exercise, a complex scenario was implemented that tested the fleet's ability to respond to multiple simultaneous threats. Enemy forces, played by ships and aircraft from other Navy units, launched coordinated attacks from different directions while electronic warfare specialists attempted to disrupt communications and sensor systems. Sarah's analytical systems tracked the developing battle in real time, identifying the effectiveness of various defensive measures and highlighting areas where coordination between units could be improved. She noticed that one particular formation was responding more slowly than expected to changing threats, potentially creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by real enemies. When Sarah presented her observations during a briefing to the exercise leadership, Captain Steele challenged her analysis. He argued that the formation was performing adequately and that her computer models couldn't capture the full complexity of tactical decision-making under pressure. His criticism was delivered in a condescending tone that suggested Sarah's youth and inexperience disqualified her from understanding real combat operations. Rear Admiral Hawthorne listened to the exchange with interest, observing both the technical aspects of Sarah's analysis and the interpersonal dynamics between the officers. He asked several pointed questions about Sarah's methodology and the assumptions underlying her computer models. Sarah answered confidently, explaining her approach and acknowledging the limitations of her analysis while defending its overall validity. The discussion became increasingly heated as Captain Steele continued to challenge Sarah's conclusions. He suggested that officers who had never commanded ships in combat situations couldn't truly understand the pressures and constraints facing operational commanders. Several other officers in the briefing room watched the confrontation unfold, some supporting Steele's position, while others seemed sympathetic to Sarah's analytical approach. Sarah maintained her professional composure throughout the exchange, but she could feel the hostile atmosphere in the room. She had encountered skepticism about her analytical methods before, but never in such a public setting with so many senior officers present. The situation was made more difficult by the fact that Steele's criticism contained elements of truth. She had never commanded ships in combat, and her understanding of operational pressures was indeed theoretical rather than experiential. The briefing ended without resolution, but the incident created lasting tensions within the exercise leadership team. Some officers began to question whether Sarah belonged in such a sensitive position, while others admired her ability to defend her analysis under pressure. The division of opinion reflected broader debates within the Navy about the role of analytical capabilities in modern warfare. Over the following days, the atmosphere aboard the USS Blue Ridge became increasingly uncomfortable for Sarah. Captain Steele and his supporters made subtle comments that questioned her qualifications and suggested that her position was the result of political considerations rather than merit. They were careful to avoid direct accusations that could result in formal complaints, but their implications were clear to everyone present. The situation deteriorated further when technical problems with the exercise computer systems created delays in Sarah's analytical reports. The problems were caused by equipment failures that were beyond her control, but Steele used the delays as evidence that her analytical systems were unreliable and that the exercise leadership was too dependent on improving technologies. Sarah worked around the clock to resolve the technical problems and maintain the quality of her analytical support. She received assistance from technical specialists flown in from shore facilities, and together they developed workarounds that allowed the analytical systems to continue functioning despite the equipment problems. Her dedication and problem-solving abilities impressed many observers, but Steele continued his criticism. The crisis came during the final major scenario of the exercise, a complex operation that simulated a large-scale naval battle involving multiple enemy forces and challenging environmental conditions. Sarah's analytical systems were working perfectly, providing real-time assessments of tactical developments and identifying opportunities for improved coordination between friendly forces. During this scenario, Sarah observed a critical pattern in enemy movements that suggested an impending coordinated attack on the main body of the fleet. Her analysis indicated that the enemy forces were positioning themselves for a complex maneuver that could potentially overwhelm the fleet's defensive systems if not countered immediately. Sarah immediately reported her observations to the exercise controllers and recommended specific defensive measures that could counter the developing threat. However, Captain Steele dismissed her warnings as alarmist and argued that the enemy movements she had identified were within normal parameters for the exercise scenario. The disagreement escalated quickly as Sarah insisted on the validity of her analysis, while Steele continued to dismiss her concerns. Other officers in the command center watched the confrontation with growing discomfort as the professional disagreement became increasingly personal. Steele's comments began to include subtle references to Sarah's background and qualifications that bordered on inappropriate. Rear Admiral Hawthorne intervened to restore order in the command center, but the damage was already done. The public disagreement had undermined Sarah's credibility and created confusion about the appropriate response to the developing tactical situation. The exercise controllers decided to proceed with the scenario without implementing Sarah's recommended defensive measures. Within hours, Sarah's predictions proved accurate as the simulated enemy forces launched their coordinated attack exactly as she had anticipated. The fleet's defensive response was inadequate, and several major units suffered significant simulated damage that would have been devastating in actual combat. The exercise scenario that was supposed to demonstrate the fleet's readiness instead exposed serious vulnerabilities in tactical coordination and threat assessment. The results of the final scenario were embarrassing for the exercise leadership and reflected poorly on the Navy's preparedness for large-scale operations. When the exercise concluded and the final briefings were conducted, there was significant discussion about the lessons learned and the need for improved analytical capabilities and better integration between traditional tactical expertise and modern technological tools. However, rather than acknowledging the value of Sarah's analysis and the accuracy of her predictions, Captain Steele and his supporters began a campaign to shift blame for the exercise problems onto her and the analytical system she represented. They argued that over-reliance on computer analysis was undermining the Navy's traditional strengths, and that the poor exercise results proved their point. The campaign against Sarah was subtle but effective. Steele and his allies spread the narrative that the analytical systems had failed during critical moments, and that Sarah's inexperience had led to confusion and poor decision-making. They carefully avoided making statements that could be proven false, but they created an overall impression that Sarah was responsible for the exercise problems. Meanwhile, Sarah prepared her final analytical report on the exercise, documenting all the observations and recommendations she had made throughout the operation. The report provided clear evidence that her analysis had been accurate and that implementing her recommendations could have prevented many of the problems that occurred during the final scenario. However, when Sarah submitted her report, she discovered that political considerations had already shaped the narrative about the exercise results. The senior leadership wanted to focus on positive aspects of the operation and avoid detailed discussion of the tactical failures that had occurred. Sarah's report, with its thorough documentation of problems and missed opportunities, was seen as potentially embarrassing rather than valuable. The final blow came during the exercise debrief ceremony, held aboard the USS Blue Ridge with all senior participants in attendance. The ceremony was supposed to recognize outstanding contributions to the exercise and provide closure for the intensive operation. Sarah expected to receive at least acknowledgement for her analytical support, given the accuracy of her predictions and the quality of her work throughout the exercise. Instead, Captain Steele was invited to present a summary of lessons learned from the exercise. His presentation focused on the importance of traditional naval skills and experienced leadership while subtly undermining the value of analytical capabilities. He made several references to the limitations of computer-based analysis and the dangers of over-relying on theoretical rather than practical knowledge. When Steele concluded his presentation, several officers in the audience began applauding. As the applause continued, Sarah realized with growing horror that some officers were looking directly at her with expressions that could only be described as mockery. The applause seemed to be celebrating not just Steele's presentation, but also the implicit criticism of her analytical approach and, by extension, her personal contributions to the exercise. The moment stretched on endlessly as Sarah sat in her chair, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The applause that should have been routine recognition for a fellow officer's presentation had become something else entirely, a public humiliation that questioned her professional competence and personal worth. She felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment as some officers continued to stare at her while applauding Steele's criticism of everything she represented. Lieutenant Sarah Chun had never felt so isolated and humiliated in her entire career. The exercise that was supposed to showcase her analytical capabilities and establish her reputation as a rising naval leader had instead become a public demonstration of the resistance she faced as a young woman trying to succeed in a traditionally male-dominated environment. But as Sarah sat in that uncomfortable moment, struggling to maintain her composure while feeling utterly alone and defeated, she had no way of knowing that someone in the audience was watching everything with very different eyes. Someone who understood exactly what was happening and who had the power to change everything in ways that no one in that room could possibly imagine. Admiral Elena Rodriguez had been watching the entire exercise unfold from what most participants assumed was just another observer position among the senior leadership. However, her presence aboard the USS Blue Ridge was far from routine. As the newly appointed Director of Naval Intelligence and the first woman to hold that position in Navy history, Admiral Rodriguez was conducting a quiet assessment of analytical capabilities throughout the fleet and specifically evaluating promising officers who might be suitable for sensitive intelligence assignments. Rodriguez had arrived at her position through an unconventional path that paralleled Sarah's experience in many ways. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, she had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in San Antonio, Texas, where her father worked construction and her mother cleaned offices. Like Sarah, she had excelled academically despite limited resources and had earned her way to the Naval Academy through pure merit and determination. During her 30-year career, Rodriguez had specialized in intelligence analysis and strategic planning, becoming one of the Navy's most respected experts on enemy capabilities and intentions. She had served in classified positions around the world, developing innovative analytical techniques and building intelligence networks that provided critical information to military leaders. Her expertise was so valued that she had been personally recruited for her current position by the Secretary of the Navy. Admiral Rodriguez had been following Sarah's career for several months, ever since receiving reports about a young lieutenant at Norfolk whose analytical work was producing exceptional results. Sarah's innovations in computer modeling and her accurate assessments of enemy capabilities had attracted attention within the intelligence community, where such skills were increasingly valuable. When Rodriguez learned that Sarah would be participating in Operation Neptune's Trident, she decided to observe her performance personally. Rodriguez understood that technical competence was only part of what made an effective intelligence officer. She also needed to evaluate Sarah's ability to work under pressure, her resilience in the face of criticism, and her capacity to maintain professional standards even in hostile environments. What Rodriguez witnessed during the exercise both impressed and concerned her. Sarah's analytical capabilities were even more impressive than the reports had suggested. Her computer models were sophisticated and accurate. Her tactical insights were valuable, and her ability to identify patterns that others missed was exceptional. These were exactly the kinds of skills that the intelligence community desperately needed. However, Rodriguez also observed the resistance and hostility that Sarah encountered from some of her colleagues. As someone who had faced similar challenges throughout her own career, Rodriguez recognized the dynamics at play. The criticism wasn't really about analytical methods or technical competence. It was about resistance to change and discomfort with diversity in naval leadership. During the heated exchange between Sarah and Captain Steele about defensive formations, Rodriguez had taken careful notes about both the technical aspects of the disagreement and the interpersonal dynamics involved. She observed how Sarah maintained her professional composure despite increasingly personal attacks, and how she defended her analysis with facts and logic rather than emotion. When Sarah's predictions about enemy movements proved accurate during the final exercise scenario, Rodriguez felt a mixture of vindication and anger. Vindication because Sarah's performance validated her assessment of the young officer's potential, and anger because the institutional resistance prevented Sarah from receiving proper recognition for her contributions. The final debrief ceremony was particularly painful for Rodriguez to witness. She watched as Captain Steele delivered his presentation with its subtle but unmistakable attacks on analytical capabilities and saw how the applause became a form of public humiliation for Sarah. Rodriguez had experienced similar moments during her own career and knew exactly how devastating such experiences could be for a young officer's confidence and future prospects. As the ceremony concluded and officers began dispersing, Rodriguez made her decision. She had originally planned to approach Sarah through official channels after the exercise, but the events she had witnessed convinced her that immediate action was necessary. Sarah needed to know that her work had been recognized and valued by someone who understood its true importance. Admiral Rodriguez stood up from her seat in the back of the ceremony space and began walking toward where Sarah was sitting. Her movement caught the attention of several officers who recognized her distinctive uniform and the unusual insignia that indicated her high-level intelligence position. Conversations began to quiet as people noticed that someone very senior was moving purposefully through the crowd. Sarah was still sitting in her chair, trying to recover from the humiliation of the ceremony while planning how to gracefully exit the gathering. She was focused on maintaining her composure and hadn't noticed the approaching Admiral until a shadow fell across her chair, and she looked up to see an older woman in Navy uniform standing directly in front of her. The woman appeared to be in her early 50s with steel-gray hair, pulled back in a perfect military style, and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Her uniform bore the 4 stars of an admiral, along with ribbons and insignia that indicated extensive service and high-level positions. Most remarkably, she wore the distinctive pins that identified her as a member of the intelligence community. "Lieutenant Chun," Admiral Rodriguez said in a clear voice that carried easily through the now-quiet ceremony space. "I've been watching your analytical work throughout this exercise, and I must say it has been exceptional. Your predictions about enemy movements were remarkably accurate, and your tactical insights could have prevented significant problems if they had been properly implemented." The entire ceremony space had gone silent, as every officer present turned to watch this unexpected interaction. Sarah felt dozens of eyes upon her again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of mockery and dismissal, there was shocked attention and growing respect as officers realized that a very senior admiral was publicly praising the young lieutenant they had just been criticizing. Sarah stood up quickly, coming to attention as protocol demanded when addressed by such a senior officer. "Thank you, ma'am," she managed to say, still trying to process what was happening. She had never seen this admiral before and had no idea why someone of such obvious importance would know about her work. "Your computer modeling techniques are innovative and sophisticated," Rodriguez continued, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly. The intelligence community has been following your work for some time, and we're very impressed with your capabilities. The Navy needs more officers with your analytical skills and strategic thinking abilities. Captain Steele had gone pale during this exchange, realizing that his criticism of analytical capabilities had just been publicly contradicted by one of the Navy's most senior intelligence officers. Other officers who had been applauding his presentation were now looking uncomfortable, suddenly aware that they might have misjudged the situation entirely. Admiral Rodriguez reached into her uniform jacket and withdrew a small card, which she handed to Sarah. "Lieutenant, I'd like you to contact my office next week. We have some opportunities that might interest you, assignments where your unique skills could make a real difference to national security." Sarah accepted the card with hands that were trembling slightly, looking down to see official contact information for the Office of Naval Intelligence, along with Admiral Rodriguez's personal signature. The card was substantial and impressive, clearly indicating that this was not a routine recruitment approach, but something much more significant. "In the meantime," Rodriguez continued, "I want everyone here to understand that Lieutenant Chen's analytical work during this exercise was outstanding. Her predictions were accurate, her recommendations were sound, and her professionalism under pressure was exemplary. The Navy is fortunate to have officers of her caliber." The Admiral's words were clearly intended as much for the assembled officers as for Sarah herself. Rodriguez was using her position and authority to publicly validate Sarah's contributions, and to make it clear that criticism of her work was inappropriate and potentially career-damaging for those who had expressed it. "Ma'am, thank you," Sarah said, finding her voice again despite her amazement at what was happening. "I'm honored by your recognition and very interested in learning more about opportunities in intelligence work." Admiral Rodriguez smiled for the first time during the exchange, and Sarah noticed that her expression was both professional and genuinely warm. "Excellent. I think you'll find that the intelligence community offers challenges that match your analytical capabilities and strategic interests. We'll be in touch very soon." With that, Admiral Rodriguez nodded to Sarah and began to turn away, but then she paused and looked directly at Captain Steele and the other officers who had been criticizing analytical approaches throughout the exercise. Her expression became more serious, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a subtle but unmistakable warning. "I should mention that the intelligence community values officers who can recognize and appreciate innovative analytical capabilities, just as we take note of those who resist beneficial changes in naval operations. In today's strategic environment, the ability to integrate traditional naval skills with advanced analytical techniques is absolutely essential for national security." The warning was diplomatically phrased, but crystal clear in its implications. Officers who had been attacking Sarah's analytical approaches had just been put on notice by one of the Navy's most powerful leaders that their attitudes were problematic and potentially harmful to their own careers. As Admiral Rodriguez walked away from the ceremony, the atmosphere in the room remained electric with tension and surprise. Officers who had been confident in their criticism of Sarah just minutes before were now realizing that they had seriously misjudged the situation. Some began approaching Sarah with congratulations and expressions of respect that had been notably absent earlier. Captain Steele found himself in a particularly awkward position. His entire presentation had been based on criticism of analytical capabilities, and he had personally attacked Sarah's contributions to the exercise. Now he faced the reality that his comments had been overheard and implicitly criticized by one of the Navy's most senior leaders. Meanwhile, Sarah stood holding Admiral Rodriguez's card, still trying to fully comprehend what had just occurred. In the space of a few minutes, her situation had been completely transformed. Instead of facing potential career damage from the exercise debacle, she was now being recruited by the highest levels of naval intelligence for opportunities that she could never have imagined. The other officers present were engaging in intense, whispered conversations, trying to understand the implications of what they had witnessed. Many were reviewing their own behavior during the exercise and wondering whether their treatment of Sarah would now reflect poorly on their own careers. The political dynamics that had seemed so clear earlier were now completely reversed. As the ceremony space gradually emptied, several officers approached Sarah to offer congratulations and express interest in her analytical techniques. These were many of the same individuals who had been skeptical or dismissive of her work throughout the exercise, but who now realized that associating themselves with her success might be beneficial for their own careers. Sarah responded politely to these approaches while privately noting the dramatic change in attitudes. She had learned a valuable lesson about how quickly perceptions could shift in military environments and how important it was to have support from senior leadership when pursuing innovative approaches to traditional problems. Rear Admiral Hawthorne, who had observed the entire exchange with great interest, approached Sarah as she was preparing to leave the ceremony. "Lieutenant," he said with a smile, "that was quite an impressive endorsement from Admiral Rodriguez. She's one of the most respected officers in the Navy, and her opinion carries enormous weight throughout the service." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, still somewhat overwhelmed by the experience. "I had no idea she was even aware of my work, let alone following it closely enough to offer such opportunities." Hawthorne nodded thoughtfully. The intelligence community operates differently from the regular Navy in many ways. They're always looking for exceptional talent, and they're often willing to take risks on promising officers that other communities might overlook. Admiral Rodriguez obviously sees something special in your analytical capabilities. As Sarah finally left the ceremony and returned to her quarters, she reflected on the extraordinary reversal of fortune she had experienced. What had begun as the most humiliating day of her career had ended with recognition from one of the Navy's most powerful leaders and an invitation to join the intelligence community at the highest levels. But Sarah also understood that her real challenges were just beginning. The public confrontation with Captain Steele and his supporters had created enemies who would not forget or forgive easily. Admiral Rodriguez's intervention had protected her from immediate consequences, but it had also marked her as someone whose career trajectory was now tied to high-level patronage and political considerations. The opportunities ahead would test not only her analytical and technical skills, but also her ability to navigate the complex politics of military leadership and intelligence work. Sarah knew that she would need to prove herself worthy of Admiral Rodriguez's confidence, while also building her own network of supporters and allies throughout the Navy. 3 days after Operation Neptune's Trident concluded, Lieutenant Sarah Chun found herself sitting in an elegantly appointed conference room in the Pentagon, across from Admiral Elena Rodriguez and 2 other senior intelligence officers. The transition from the hostile environment aboard the USS Blue Ridge to this prestigious setting felt almost surreal, like stepping through a doorway into an entirely different world. Admiral Rodriguez had personally arranged for Sarah's temporary duty assignment to Washington, ensuring that she could be immediately integrated into ongoing intelligence projects rather than returning to Norfolk, where the political fallout from the exercise might create additional problems. The speed and efficiency of the transfer demonstrated the considerable influence that Rodriguez wielded within Navy bureaucracy. "Lieutenant Chun," Admiral Rodriguez began, "before we discuss your future assignments, I think it's important for you to understand exactly why your work caught our attention and how it fits into larger strategic challenges facing the Navy and the intelligence community." Sarah listened intently as Rodriguez explained how traditional naval intelligence collection and analysis methods were struggling to keep pace with rapidly evolving threats from potential adversaries. Enemy nations were developing new technologies and tactics that required innovative analytical approaches to understand and counter effectively. "Your computer modeling techniques represent exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need," Rodriguez continued. "Your ability to identify patterns and predict enemy behavior using mathematical analysis could provide significant advantages in future conflicts. But We also need to understand whether you're interested in the kind of work that intelligence professionals do. Over the next several hours, Rodriguez and her colleagues provided Sarah with a comprehensive overview of modern naval intelligence operations. They described how intelligence officers collected information about enemy capabilities and intentions, analyzed complex data from multiple sources, and provided strategic assessments that influenced military planning at the highest levels. The work was fascinating and challenging, combining technical analysis with strategic thinking in ways that perfectly matched Sarah's interests and abilities. Intelligence officers needed to understand not just enemy military capabilities, but also political motivations, economic factors, and cultural influences that shaped adversary decision-making processes. During their discussions, Sarah learned more about Admiral Rodriguez's background and realized that their career paths had remarkable similarities. Rodriguez had also faced skepticism and resistance as a young officer, particularly because of her gender and ethnic background. She had overcome these challenges through exceptional performance and had eventually earned recognition as one of the Navy's most capable intelligence professionals. The intelligence community has always been more willing than other parts of the Navy to recognize talent regardless of background, Rodriguez explained. We care about results and capabilities, not about fitting traditional profiles or meeting conventional expectations. That's one reason why I was able to advance to positions that might have been difficult to reach in other specialties. Rodriguez also shared some of the challenges she had faced during her career, including incidents similar to what Sarah had experienced during the exercise. Early in her career, Rodriguez had been publicly criticized by senior officers who questioned her analytical methods and suggested that she wasn't suited for intelligence work. The parallel experiences created an immediate bond of understanding between the two women. The incident during the exercise debrief was particularly troubling to me, Rodriguez admitted, because it reminded me of similar experiences I had as a young officer. The difference is that I didn't have a senior mentor to intervene on my behalf. I had to fight those battles alone, which made advancement much more difficult and took longer to achieve. Sarah began to understand that Rodriguez's intervention during the ceremony had been motivated by more than just professional interest in her analytical capabilities. The Admiral had recognized a younger version of herself in Sarah's situation and had chosen to use her position to provide the kind of support that she had wished for during her own early career struggles. As the day progressed, Rodriguez introduced Sarah to other intelligence professionals who would be working with her on various projects. Many of these officers had impressive credentials and extensive experience in different aspects of intelligence operations. They welcomed Sarah warmly and expressed genuine interest in her analytical techniques and strategic insights. The contrast with her experience at Norfolk was striking. Instead of skepticism and resistance, Sarah encountered enthusiasm and collaboration. The intelligence community operated with a different culture that valued innovation and results over traditional hierarchies and conventional approaches. Officers were evaluated based on their contributions rather than their backgrounds or adherence to established patterns. During the afternoon, Sarah was briefed on several ongoing intelligence projects where her skills could contribute immediately. One involved analyzing enemy naval construction programs to predict future fleet capabilities. Another focused on understanding adversary decision-making processes during crisis situations. A third examined the strategic implications of new technologies being developed by potential enemies. Each project required exactly the kind of analytical thinking and computer modeling that Sarah had been developing throughout her career. The work was intellectually challenging and strategically important, offering opportunities to make real contributions to national security while continuing to develop her professional capabilities. That evening, Admiral Rodriguez invited Sarah to dinner at a quiet restaurant near the Pentagon, providing an opportunity for a more personal conversation about her career plans and future goals. Away from the formal military environment, Rodriguez was able to share more candid observations about the challenges facing women in naval leadership and the importance of building supportive networks. One thing I learned early in my career, Rodriguez said over dinner, is that excellence alone isn't always enough to overcome institutional resistance and unconscious bias. You also need allies and mentors who can provide opportunities and support when obstacles arise. That's part of why I wanted to meet you personally and ensure that you had options beyond the traditional career paths. Rodriguez also revealed something that surprised Sarah. She had been following her career since her academy graduation, not just the recent months at Norfolk. Several of Sarah's former instructors and supervisors had provided informal reports about her performance and potential, creating a comprehensive picture of her capabilities and character. Captain Harrison from the Academy spoke very highly of your analytical abilities and your resilience under pressure, Rodriguez mentioned. He predicted that you would eventually make significant contributions to naval strategy, but he also warned that you might face resistance from some quarters of the traditional Navy establishment. Sarah realized that her career development had been shaped by a network of supportive professionals who had recognized her potential and had been quietly working to provide opportunities for advancement. This revelation was both gratifying and somewhat overwhelming, as it suggested that her success hadn't been achieved entirely through individual effort. The intelligence community can provide a career path where your analytical skills will be valued and where you can advance based on merit rather than politics, Rodriguez explained. But I want you to understand that this work also comes with unique challenges and responsibilities. Intelligence professionals often work on sensitive projects that require absolute discretion and personal sacrifice. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into her new assignments with the same intensity and dedication that had characterized her work throughout her career. The intelligence projects were more complex and intellectually demanding than anything she had encountered previously, requiring her to develop new analytical techniques and expand her understanding of strategic issues. Working with classified information and contributing to assessments that could influence major policy decisions was both exciting and sobering. Sarah began to understand the enormous responsibility that intelligence professionals carried and the critical importance of accuracy and objectivity in their work. Her computer modeling techniques proved to be even more valuable in the intelligence environment than they had been in operational assignments. The ability to process large amounts of complex data and identify subtle patterns was exactly what was needed to understand adversary capabilities and predict future developments. Within months, Sarah's analytical innovations were being adopted by intelligence units throughout the Navy and other military services. Her techniques for analyzing enemy naval construction programs provided early warning about new threats, while her models for understanding crisis decision-making helped military leaders prepare for potential conflicts. The professional recognition that had been denied to her during the exercise was now coming from the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Sarah received commendations from senior admirals, intelligence directors, and even Pentagon officials who recognized the strategic value of her analytical work. Meanwhile, the fallout from Operation Neptune's Trident continued to affect the careers of some of the officers who had been involved in the incident. Captain Steele's criticism of analytical capabilities, which had seemed reasonable during the exercise, now appeared short-sighted and inappropriate in light of the intelligence community's emphasis on innovative analytical techniques. Several officers who had supported Steele's position found their advancement prospects limited as the Navy increasingly valued the kind of analytical capabilities that Sarah represented. The incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of resisting beneficial changes and the importance of recognizing emerging trends in military operations. Admiral Rodriguez continued to serve as Sarah's mentor and advocate, providing guidance on navigating the complex politics of intelligence work and helping her develop leadership skills that would be essential for future advancement. Their relationship evolved from formal mentorship into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. As Sarah's reputation within the intelligence community grew, she began receiving opportunities to brief senior military leaders and civilian officials on strategic issues related to her analytical work. These experiences provided valuable exposure to high-level decision-making processes and helped her understand how intelligence analysis influenced policy development. The transformation of Sarah's career from the humiliation of the exercise debrief to recognition as one of the Navy's most promising intelligence officers was remarkable, but it was also the result of years of preparation and exceptional performance under pressure. Admiral Rodriguez had provided the opportunity and support, but Sarah had demonstrated the capabilities and character necessary to succeed in this demanding environment. Looking back on the incident that had seemed so devastating at the time, Sarah came to understand that the confrontation during Operation Neptune's Trident had actually been a crucial turning point in her career. Without that moment of crisis, she might never have come to Admiral Rodriguez's attention or been offered the opportunities that ultimately defined her professional path. The experience also taught Sarah valuable lessons about resilience, the importance of maintaining professional standards under pressure, and the power of having allies and mentors who believed in her potential. These lessons would serve her well as she continued to advance within the intelligence community and eventually assumed leadership positions where she could provide similar support to other promising young officers. Years later, when Sarah had achieved her own flag rank and was serving in senior intelligence positions, she would often reflect on that moment of public humiliation and the extraordinary intervention that changed everything. She made it her personal mission to identify and support other promising officers who faced similar challenges, ensuring that they had the opportunities and mentorship that had made all the difference in her own career. Admiral Rodriguez's intervention had not just saved Sarah's career. It had also established a model for how senior leaders could use their positions to support innovation, recognize talent, and ensure that the Navy continued to evolve and adapt to changing strategic requirements. The incident became part of naval folklore, a reminder that sometimes the most significant moments in a career come from unexpected directions, and that excellence, when properly supported, will ultimately triumph over prejudice and resistance to change.